Inside the Davos room, Trump, power, performance, and the politics of global unease. Welcome to GAF, Global Affairs Forum. I'm Rebecca Lawson. Today, we take you inside the room at Davos, where power was not whispered, it was spoken aloud. What happens when a U.S. president openly challenges global norms in front of the world's elite? What does polite applause really mean in geopolitics? And how close are we to a new era where power outweighs principle? This is not just about Donald Trump. This is about the future of global order. Let's begin. I want to take you inside a room where symbolism mattered as much as substance, where applause competed with disbelief, and where the future of global order was hinted at, not through policy papers, but through tone, posture, and provocation. This is Davos, the annual gathering of global elites at the World Economic Forum, a place where presidents usually arrive to reassure markets, allies, and institutions. But when Donald Trump entered the hall this time, the atmosphere was anything but routine. As described firsthand by Faisal Islam, this was not merely a speech, it was an event, a standing ovation, an astonishing security lockdown. Heads of state turned away, a physical manifestation of how polarizing and magnetic Trump remains on the world stage. The question that hovered over the room long before Trump spoke was simple but profound. Which Donald Trump was about to show up? The opening act. Charm, calm, and calculated restraint. In the opening minutes, Trump appeared measured, calm, even by Davos standards, conciliatory. He spoke warmly of allies. He expressed goodwill toward the United Kingdom. He projected something close to statesmanship. For those expecting the sharp-edged Trump of social media, the Trump who had recently claimed Greenland will be America's, this felt almost disarming. It was, in many ways, grandfatherly advice rather than imperial decree. This tone did not emerge in a vacuum. Just hours earlier, Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, had reportedly told a European audience that, economically speaking, you're dead. That remark triggered a walkout. Davos noticed. Trump noticed. And so, at least initially, this speech felt like damage control. The shadow behind the smile, when the speech turned dark. But Trump, as history reminds us, rarely sustains restraint for long. Almost imperceptibly, the speech shifted. The charm gave way to grievance. The reassurance gave way to assertion. Trump began recounting America's historic role in Europe, its military sacrifices, its post-war leadership. Then came the line that landed like a thunderclap in the Alps, that without the United States, everyone in the room would be speaking German. It was not just a historical oversimplification, it was a reminder of hierarchy, a reminder of who, in Trump's worldview, still holds the ultimate leverage. And then came Greenland. Greenland and the return of territorial politics. Trump announced that he was seeking immediate negotiations for the United States to acquire Greenland. Not by force, he insisted. Not an invasion, a deal, a negotiated settlement, full title, American ownership. Greenland, he said, was needed to build the greatest golden dome ever built, a strategic and symbolic structure that would also, he claimed, help defend Canada. His message to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who had criticized the idea a day earlier, was clear. Greenland would protect Canada, whether Canada liked the plan or not. I'm asking for a piece of ice, Trump said. It's a very small ask. In that moment, laughter, shock, and silence competed in the room, because what was being proposed, openly and unapologetically, was the return of 19th century geopolitics in a 21st century forum. Europe's dilemma, ally, audience, or obstacle. Greenland is not just ice. It is territory under the Kingdom of Denmark, a NATO ally. It is also strategically vital, rich in rare earth minerals, positioned along Arctic shipping lanes, and increasingly central to U.S.-China competition. Trump's framing, friendly negotiation backed by overwhelming power, placed Europe in an impossible position. Applaud and legitimize the claim, reject and risk retaliation, laugh it off and hope it disappears? The room's reaction revealed the tension. polite applause for the charm, stunned silence for the substance. French President Emmanuel Macron, according to multiple accounts, had already pushed back forcefully in private. So had Carney. And that pushback may explain why Trump insisted, repeatedly, that he would not invade Greenland. But the message remained unmistakable. Greenland will be part of the new America, and the world should be grateful. American reactions. Division travels with power. Back home, reactions were swift and revealing. California Governor Gavin Newsom dismissed the performance as Taco Tuesday, a reference to the phrase "Trump always chickens out," used by critics to suggest that Trump escalates rhetorically only to retreat under pressure. More significantly, Republican Senator Thom Tillis publicly stated that even a negotiated annexation of Greenland would not have congressional backing. That matters, because it exposes a recurring tension in Trump's global posture: enormous personal authority, constrained institutional power. And allies at Davos understood this contradiction very clearly. Worldwide comparisons, when strong men watch and learn. What made this speech globally consequential was not just what Trump said, but who was listening. In Beijing, Moscow, Ankara, and beyond, leaders who favor spheres of influence over rules-based order were undoubtedly taking notes. If the U.S. president can openly discuss acquiring territory from an ally, what restrains others from making similar claims? This is the same logic used by Russia in Ukraine, by China in the South China Sea, by authoritarian regimes who argue that power, not law, defines legitimacy. Trump's Davos speech, intentionally or not, weakened the moral architecture the West has relied upon since 1945. A forward-looking warning: the normalization of the unthinkable. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this moment was not the proposal itself, but how quickly it entered mainstream discussion. No laughter drowned it out, no immediate walkout followed, no unified rebuke emerged from the stage. Instead, the idea now exists, on the record, normalized enough to be debated, and that is how global norms erode, not through tanks, but through repetition. Trump left the stage. The applause faded, the security cordon relaxed, but the implications did not leave the room, because Davos was supposed to be about cooperation, stability, and shared prosperity. Instead, it became a reminder that the post-war order is no longer sacred, even to those who built it. And as we look ahead, the question facing the world is not simply whether Trump will pursue Greenland. The deeper question is whether global leaders, institutions, and citizens are prepared for a future where power speaks louder than principle, where allies are negotiable, and where even the unthinkable can be said, out loud, at Davos. The silence after Davos, what the room did not say. What lingered after the applause and the awkward laughter was not outrage, but hesitation, and in geopolitics, hesitation is often read as permission. In the corridors of Davos, away from the cameras and the security cordons, delegates whispered rather than protested. Diplomats recalibrated language. CEOs recalculated risk. The silence was not approval, but it was not resistance either. That silence matters, because when a sitting U.S. president openly discusses acquiring territory from an ally at the World Economic Forum, and the global elite responds with polite applause instead of a firm rebuke, it signals a shift, not in law, but in expectations. NATO, alliances, and the stress test no one planned for. Greenland sits at the intersection of alliances, geography, and global security. It is linked to NATO through Denmark, and it plays a strategic role in Arctic surveillance, missile defense, and emerging polar shipping routes. Trump's framing, that Greenland would strengthen Western defense, protect Canada, and secure America's future, was deliberately calculated. It wrapped territorial ambition in the language of collective security. But NATO was built on consent, not coercion, on sovereignty, not transactions. If one NATO member can pressure another into relinquishing territory by negotiation, what does Article 5 truly mean in a world of asymmetric power? This is the stress test NATO was never designed for. The Arctic dimension. Why Greenland is not really about ice. To understand the gravity of Trump's words, one must look north, not politically, but geographically. The Arctic is fast becoming the next great theater of global competition. Melting ice has opened new shipping lanes. Beneath the surface lie rare earth minerals critical for clean energy, defense systems, and advanced technology. China has already declared itself a near-Arctic state. Russia has militarized vast stretches of its northern coastline, and the United States, long focused elsewhere, is now racing to catch up. Greenland is central to that race. So when Trump said, "We want this land," it was not a rhetorical slip. It was a strategic declaration, delivered bluntly, without the diplomatic cushioning typically used to soften such ambitions. Europe's strategic paradox. Security dependence, political fragility. Europe's dilemma was visible in real time at Davos. On one hand, European states depend heavily on U.S. security guarantees, especially amid ongoing tensions involving Russia and the unresolved war in Ukraine. On the other, Trump's speech reminded them just how conditional that support can appear under an America First doctrine. Trump's remark that Europe would be speaking German without the U.S. was more than provocation. It was a reminder of dependency and an assertion of leverage. This is the paradox Europe now faces: how to assert sovereignty while relying on a partner that increasingly views alliances as transactional. China and Russia are watching, quietly, carefully. If European leaders were unsettled, Beijing and Moscow were likely intrigued. China's leadership has long argued that Western criticism of territorial ambition is selective and self-serving. Trump's Greenland comments give weight to that argument. Russia, meanwhile, has justified its own territorial moves by citing security needs, historical ties, and strategic necessity, the very language Trump employed, albeit with a smile. When norms bend at the top, they fracture everywhere else. The Trump method: ambiguity as strategy. One of the most revealing aspects of the Davos speech was its deliberate ambiguity. Trump promised not to invade Greenland, but insisted it would become American. He criticized allies while insisting they should be grateful. He softened his tone while escalating his claims. This is not contradiction, it is method. Ambiguity allows multiple audiences to hear what they want. Supporters hear strength, allies hear reassurance, adversaries hear opportunity, and markets, always sensitive to uncertainty, hear risk. What Davos revealed about global leadership in 2026. Davos is often criticized as detached from reality, but this year it served as a mirror. It revealed a world struggling to respond to power spoken plainly. A global elite unsure whether to confront, accommodate, or wait out the storm. It revealed institutions built for consensus, now facing personalities built for disruption. And it revealed a growing gap between what global leaders privately fear and what they are publicly willing to challenge. Because once a U.S. president can openly float the acquisition of allied territory at Davos, the question is no longer if global norms are changing. The question is how quickly and who will shape what comes next. Markets heard more than words, the financial undercurrent. While the headlines focused on Greenland and rhetoric, financial markets were listening for something else: intent. In Davos, policy is often inferred not from formal announcements but from tone. Investors parse pauses, emphasis, and what is left unsaid. Trump's speech, measured at first, then assertive, sent mixed signals: stability at the surface, volatility underneath. Global fund managers privately acknowledged that the Greenland remarks were not immediately market-moving, but they were risk-defining. Sovereign risk, alliance risk, and geopolitical tail risk all quietly repriced. This is how uncertainty enters the system, not with a crash, but with a gradual widening of spreads. Denmark and the limits of quiet diplomacy. For Denmark, the Davos moment created an almost impossible diplomatic puzzle. Publicly, Danish officials reaffirmed Greenland's autonomy and right to self-determination. Privately, they faced a more complex reality: how to respond firmly to a U.S. president without triggering retaliation, economic, political, or security-related. Greenland's own leaders have repeatedly stated that the island is not for sale. Yet Trump's framing attempted to bypass sovereignty altogether, treating ownership as a negotiable variable rather than a settled principle. That reframing is dangerous because it challenges not just Denmark, but the entire post-colonial consensus. Canada's position, shielded by alliance, exposed by geography. Canada found itself drawn into the narrative almost casually but meaningfully. Trump's assertion that Greenland would help defend Canada was presented as reassurance. In reality, it raised uncomfortable questions in Ottawa about agency, consent, and strategic voice. When defense becomes something done for a country rather than with a country, sovereignty subtly erodes. Canada's leadership understood this subtext. So did others in the room. The United Nations. Elephant in the room. What was striking at Davos was not only what was said, but what institutions were absent from the conversation. There was no reference to the United Nations, no invocation of international law, no appeal to multilateral arbitration. That absence was itself a statement. In a world increasingly shaped by power politics, institutions designed to mediate between states are being sidelined, not formally dismantled, but quietly ignored. Davos, once a platform for reinforcing global governance, instead became a stage for demonstrating how optional those frameworks have become. Strongmen, democracies, and the new global script. Trump's Davos appearance fits into a broader global pattern. Leaders with strong personal mandates increasingly bypass institutions and speak directly, often provocatively, to both domestic and international audiences. The goal is not consensus, but dominance of narrative. Democracies, by contrast, remain slow, procedural, and cautious. They deliberate, they consult, they hesitate. In Davos, that contrast was on full display. And the danger is not that strongmen speak boldly, it is that democracies struggle to respond with equal clarity. Is this negotiation or normalization? One question quietly circulating in Davos lounges was whether Trump's Greenland remarks were a genuine opening position or something else entirely. Some argued it was classic Trump, stake out an extreme claim, then retreat to a reasonable compromise. Others believed it was a deliberate attempt to normalize the idea of territorial acquisition so that future demands would seem less shocking. Both interpretations are plausible, and that ambiguity is precisely the point. The psychology of power, why words matter more than policy. History teaches us that major geopolitical shifts often begin rhetorically before they materialize materially. Borders are questioned before they are redrawn. Norms are mocked before they are broken. Silence precedes acceptance. Trump's Davos speech may never translate into formal negotiations. Congress may block it. Allies may resist it. Reality may intervene. But the psychological shift has already occurred. The idea has entered global discourse, and ideas once spoken at Davos have a way of lingering. What global leaders took home from the Alps. As delegations departed Switzerland, leaders carried different lessons home. Some saw reassurance. Trump softened, joked, avoided invasion talk. Others saw warning, power is back, unapologetically. Many saw uncertainty. Alliances feel conditional, norms feel flexible. And that uncertainty is now part of the global operating environment. Because Davos was never just about one speech. It was about a world testing how far language can go before reality pushes back. The road ahead, from Davos words to global consequences. What happened in Davos cannot be dismissed as theater alone. History is clear on this point. Moments that feel rhetorical often become reference points later, when circumstances change and restraint weakens. Trump's speech did not redraw borders. It did not trigger sanctions or emergency summits, but it shifted the conversation window, what political scientists call the boundary of what is publicly sayable by a major power. Once that boundary moves, returning it to its original place becomes extraordinarily difficult. That is the deeper significance of Davos 2026. Advice to global leaders. Restore clarity before ambiguity hardens. For global leaders, especially those in democratic systems, the lesson from Davos is urgent. First, silence is no longer neutral. When norms are challenged publicly, they must be defended publicly. Quiet diplomacy has its place, but when ambiguity dominates the stage, it invites miscalculation. Second, institutions must speak with confidence. Alliances like NATO and multilateral bodies such as the United Nations cannot rely on their historical legitimacy alone. They must reaffirm, clearly and repeatedly, that sovereignty, consent, and international law are not optional. Third, language matters as much as policy. Allowing territorial acquisition to be framed as a negotiation between unequal powers risks legitimizing coercion everywhere else. Leaders must challenge that framing early, not after it has taken root. Finally, democratic unity is a strategic asset. Fragmented responses only strengthen narratives of inevitability and dominance. Coordinated messaging is no longer a diplomatic courtesy, it is a defensive necessity. Advice to global citizens: do not underestimate words spoken at the top. For global citizens, the takeaway is equally important. Pay attention not only to what leaders do, but to what they say and how often they say it. Normalization begins with repetition, not action. Demand accountability from elected officials when they challenge long-standing principles. Ask hard questions when power is justified through history, security, or gratitude rather than law. And resist the temptation to view geopolitics as distant or abstract. Decisions and narratives shaped in rooms like Davos eventually affect borders, economies, migration, security, and daily life. Democracy weakens not only through force, but through fatigue, when citizens stop caring about norms until they are gone. Summary of key messages. At Davos, President Donald Trump delivered a speech that began with charm and restraint, but evolved into a stark assertion of power, culminating in an open call for negotiations to acquire Greenland. The reaction, polite applause mixed with visible disbelief, revealed a world unsure how to respond to power spoken so plainly. The episode exposed growing tensions within alliances, particularly between the United States and Europe, and highlighted the fragility of post-war norms built on sovereignty and consent. It signaled to rivals that territorial ambition can once again be voiced openly by major powers without immediate consequence. And it demonstrated how ambiguity, when left unchallenged, becomes a strategic tool. Davos 2026 was not just about Greenland. It was about the shifting language of global order. It was about how easily the unthinkable can enter mainstream discourse. And it was a reminder that the future of international stability will be shaped not only by actions taken, but by words tolerated. This is Rebecca Lawson for GAF, Global Affairs Forum, where we continue to follow the moments that quietly redefine the world. Thank you for watching GAF, Global Affairs Forum. If you value deep analysis beyond headlines, like, subscribe, and join the conversation. Until next time, stay informed, stay global.